You know, some of the most fascinating aspects of human beings is the lengths to which they will go to lie or create a false narrative or commit a fraud. There's just no limit to it. And as we've talked about, as I talked about over and over about old Castor Semenya, you know, eventually the truth comes out. And of course, with him, with his new book out, he's squealing like a stuck pig, you know. And now that the fact that everybody suspected that he was a man came to pass. But he hasn't made that many headlines as of late. The one that's made the big headlines is the folk singer, famed folk singer, Buffy Sainte-Marie, who was born Beverly Jean Santa Maria in Massachusetts in 1941. And the long, convoluted narrative that she has tried to perpetrate on the public, hugely successfully, has finally come unraveled. It took over 60 years. She started her career at age 20 or thereabouts in around 1960-61. And she was playing in the coffee houses. And she was a contemporary of Bob Dylan and Joni Mitchell and Joan Baez and all the rest of them. But her little shtick was that she was supposedly indigenous. That's what Canadians would call, and more in the U.S., call their native-born, of native ancestry, I should say. What they call them is indigenous. So she had that angle, and that made her more money than perhaps many other folk singers, and she hit the big time in around the mid-60s. And you know, her career had its ups and downs. But now, thanks to some astute people in the indigenous or First Nations or Native American community, she's been revealed as a fraud. There's no other word to describe her. She's a fraud. She's a fraud like Anna Anderson. She's a fraud like Tanya Head. Total fraud. But she's worse because it's like a case of stolen valor. Because she took honors and she took awards away from those, and specific awards for those of indigenous backgrounds. They were created just for them. And they, and she stole it. She outright stole it. And then she had that Order of Canada, I think Queen Elizabeth, bestowed on her. Can you imagine? She conned the Queen, the late Queen of England. That's as bad as it gets. This woman is a major con artist. And she did a lot, you know, for Native Americans, Indigenous, First Nations, whatever you want to call them. That's one thing. But the thing is, she never had to do what she did. She never had to do it. As one person noted in that explosive documentary called Fifth Estate from the CBC in Canada, she notes that Buffy didn't have to perform in red face. She could have just been herself and never had to do this. But now all the lies have come out. Her entire narrative has been exposed as a pack of lies. We know she's Italian, from Italian ancestry and some English ancestry, so it's all white European. Her birth certificate says she was born of white parents, that she was white. And no, she was not ever adopted because of the way the birth certificates were filed. And hers was like 49 in that town where she was born. And so it's sandwiched between 48 and 50. And that's only in a matter of a few days. They couldn't have had an adoption go on then. And the doctor had certified that he had delivered her, just as he delivered her sister. And then, of course, speaking of her sister, she had done a DNA test, and they found, and she found, and they found, the documentary makers found that she and Buffy's son were related, were blood relatives. So the whole thing of her, Buffy, being not knowing, not having a birth certificate, supposedly was born in Saskatchewan, and then later she was scooped up in some, you know, the 60s scoop or whatever they called it, and she ended up with a family in Massachusetts. All that was bullshit. It was all bullshit. And the daughter of the, and I'm talking about the documentary now, which I'll post a link, but the daughter of her brother, pretty much, I mean, she had all kinds of movie camera movies, home movies, I should say, of her when she was a little girl. There's all these yearbook pictures that she had of Buffy, and there was nothing there indicating anything about any indigenous ancestry. It was all a con. It was all a con. And a lot of people were very upset about it. And there's been calls for her to return certain awards that she got under false pretenses. Well, it's stolen valor. But in the United States, that has to do with military, and it's a felony. It's a crime. It's a federal crime to do it. And has been since 2013. And I don't know if there's any laws in Canada about falsely impersonating Indigenous people for monetary gain. But if there isn't, there should be, because that's a big deal. That this isn't your normal scandal of false identity. This is bad. And so, yeah, some writers could talk about how all the good things she did, but she didn't have to put on a fraud. She didn't have to do it. And then the other day she did an interview with, of course, the Guardian, and she denied it. But one of the most despicable things is, first of all, she kept changing, as the documentary noted, she kept changing her group, indigenous group or tribe or whatever you want to call it, she was a member of. She kept changing that over a period of a year, like 3 different ones. And then she decided on the Cree. And then her uncle had written to a local paper saying, no, she's not indigenous. She's not, or they would have said then, Indian. Not at all. Not a drop. And the media didn't follow up on this. This garbage could have been nipped in the bud. And she probably would have recovered from it. She probably would have done okay. And she still could have done everything that she did. This was all greed. This was all an angle to get more money and more publicity for herself. And it worked. But it was all a lie. And then her brother, who's now dead, he tried to notify Sesame Street. Well, he didn't notify. He ran into a producer or something who was with Buffy, because he was an airline pilot, and he ran into him, and the guy was kind of surprised how quote unquote white he looked. Now I'm doing this from memory, and the brother said, basically he said, yeah, yes, he is. And of course it got back to Buffy, and then she made that damn threat, and then tried to blackmail him successfully, because she was going to out him as a molester, and I don't believe a word of that. I don't believe a word that he ever molested her. I mean, she lied about everything else. So why could she ever be trusted with that? So, this is a hell of a way to end your final years. Being shamed, going into disgrace, and she retired from performing. I wonder if she knew this stuff was coming down the pike. Even though she's 82, I really wonder if she knew she was going to be exposed, and she decided to call it quits. I don't know. But when you sit there and you flat out lie you don't have a birth certificate, and they find a birth certificate, that's the end of the ball game. And all the other stuff, the census records, the marriage license, the insurance policies, I think like her brother's military thing, she was listed, and where she was born. I mean, there's all this evidence, this mountain of evidence. All of that. It's the end of the road. You don't need to have her take a DNA test, because her sister already did that. So there you are. And it's a hell of a scandal. She's going to be remembered as another, well, what is it, gray owl. And that was before my time, almost all of our times. But this was an English guy who he was trying to pretend he'd be something he wasn't. And his name was Archie Baloney. I call him Baloney. I mean, like they call Buffy now Bluffy. So, they might as well call him Baloney. And he was a conservationist. He did a lot of good. But he peddled himself as something he wasn't. I think he was supposedly half Native American or something. But, or indigenous. And right after he died, well, there were whispers anyway, but he was pretty much exposed as a fake. So that's that. I won't go into that in any detail, because I had to look up this guy that called himself Gray Owl, and he was just an English guy and stuff. But yeah, I'm always interested in hoaxes and frauds and things like that. I've always been kind of that way. But this thing, out of all the ones that those in the indigenous community have exposed as pretendians, this one is the one that's really the most damning so far, because she got all those awards under false pretenses. And hopefully she returns, she does the right thing, but I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, that is my ramble for tonight.